Okay. It looks as though no one from the Journal of Controversial Ideas has decided to turn up for Free Speech Live today. This was not entirely unexpected. In many ways, we know that our ideas are far too controversial for the Journal of Controversial Ideas, those ideas being that they are just making up a bunch of rubbish, and that there is no such thing as a set of ideas that are too controversial. But we will discuss some of the remarkably insightful articles that they have published since their launch this year. According to Peter Singer, who we did invite, they'd been working 7 years on this. It took us a weekend to put our performative criticism of them onto the air, so I'm not sure what took them so long to get their sort of performance piece journal out into the world. But we're hopeful that we can prove that we can be more controversial than they are. But just in case they do decide to turn up, I'll send them the link one more time, and we'll start the countdown. After which we will start a program with other more interesting people. So, controversial ideas editors have decided not to turn up. I think that we are too controversial, and that's up to them. We will, however, discuss their journal of controversial ideas in their absence. So, we did give them the opportunity for a right of reply, but they don't seem very interested. So what we will do instead today is bring on our panel of experts. And this week we have our regular guy, some guy. Hello, how are you?
Hello, my name's Some Guy, and I'm here to talk about controversial ideas.
Great. Good stuff, good stuff. And we actually have a very special guest this week as well. So Dave Hitchcock, a historian from Canterbury Christchurch. Hi, Dave.
Hi, how's it going, Eric?
Hello,
Hi, Some
hello.
Guy. How are you?
Hi.
And
You gonna pose that way the whole time?
Thumbs up. So, yes, Dave, we've asked you to join us because of a particular issue that you've written about that actually fairly substantially does much more than any of these made up cancel culture. Like, this is actual cancel culture that we'll be discussing, the kind of cancellation of funding for performing arts subjects, media studies, and so forth at university, archaeology, and so on. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But for now, would we like to look a bit more at this Journal for Controversial Ideas? Shall we take a look at what they've done that is so controversial? Yeah.
I mean, what's funny is not very much. Like, there's the odd paper, and like they've got 2 volumes out. They seem to be going at quite a clip at the moment, don't they? So whoever they've got double-blind peer reviewing this is saying yes a lot more often than anyone else in higher education to reviewing these papers, which is interesting in and of itself. Yeah. But they just, I've read a bit of a few of them, and they're just not very good. No. Some of them are, kind of middle of the road pieces of academic writing. Some of them are, as you can see, kind of gender critical pieces of scholarship, which are then replied to and so on. But most of them are just kind of dull, really. Not a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
Although I have to say my absolute favorite was the one that said we will never find ultimate meaning and that we should be very sad about that. And that, that was a controversial idea.
That doesn't sound controversial to me. I thought that was just kind of part of being born.
I mean, look at that abstract. Yeah. Life is pointless. That's not okay. I show that. I mean, just...
Oh, here we go. Ultimate meaning. We don't have, and we should be very, very... and also, isn't that... I mean, Being in Time was written at what point? Isn't that the same premise of that?
Yeah. No, it's basically, someone's discovered existentialism and has decided to kind of launder it in the 21st century, which is fair enough. Like, it's a fun set of ideas, but like, it's not exactly controversial.
No, it's not, is it? Now, the one thing I did see is this is Black Pete. So one is kind of blackface is okay. I suppose that's controversial. It's also just, that's also just offensive, but I'm not sure anyone would stop you from writing that. I mean, that seems to be their premise? Yes. I mean, let's go look at this because I found their what's it called? Their editorial, and they have said that they've been working on this since 2013. And
it's a long peer review process. It took 8 years.
But so in a lot of ways, they're actually, one of the first people out with this like worry about cancel culture, and they're sort of arriving even slightly late. I almost feel like. I mean, this leaps over the entire Jordan Peterson era. But it sounds like, from what I'm reading here, 20 years ago, most academic journals were available in university libraries and to paid subscribers, and almost exclusively to academics. And so for them, the problem is that the internet removes things like paywalls and allows people to actually read these articles. That seems to be their problem.
Or they might even be like giving them the benefit of the doubt. They might even be in favor of as much open access scholarship as possible. I mean, the Journal of Controversial Ideas is open access, isn't it? But I don't know. Presumably, kind of taking the position that other forms of that form of censorship has sort of persisted, but that other forms of censorship have come into existence, self-censoring or some other form of kind of off-camera control of the discourse, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they seem to have this thing of the mobbing, which is a kind of, to me, it's sort of an anti-populist position, isn't it? It's sort of like there are all these people who criticize what I've written in my academic paper, but they don't understand. And therefore it's unacceptable to sort of criticize. I mean, I suppose they're still talking about no platforming. So some students have demanded speakers are prevented from speaking. Okay.
Yeah, Singer's a philosopher. He should know better than to make claims without any substantiation like that. I mean, that's the kind of thing where you would circle it in a paper and be like, vague, please provide evidence, right? And again, you've done this with Kaufman, right? You've said like, where's your evidence for this? And they're like, well, Germaine Greer, and it's like, she wasn't actually stopped, guys. Like, she went on to give that paper, and there were a couple people outside holding placards, and that's university campus, right? Like,
Eric, you should show the reflections from one of the members of the editorial board that I've just sent you in the chat.
Have you sent a... let's see. Oh, okay, so this is the member of the editorial board.
This is a member of the editorial board, and if you scroll down to the 5 reasons for justifying the existence of the Journal of Controversial Ideas,
I see.
I find it very illuminating.
Right. So this is off of dyered.com.
Yeah, it's from Professor Andrew Timming, whom I believe it's an academic from Australia, possibly RMIT, although I can't remember exactly.
Sure.
And I find the first point actually really helpful in helping us figure out what exactly is going on here, because it says controversial research often fails peer review, not because it is methodologically or theoretically unsound, but because it offends the sensibilities and biases of peer reviewers. So I guess if you get rejected in the peer review process, that's no platforming.
Yeah. I mean,
which is a really useful thing, right? Because I don't know about you guys, maybe you guys have never had things rejected by a journal, but now whenever my paper gets rejected by a journal, I can just say, well, it's been no platform.
Yeah,
it's not because it's methodologically or theoretically unsound, it's because your reviewers are biased.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, the elephant in the room on that one is this gender critical feminism, which we should also mention. I suppose Stick Stock's book has been out. I'll see if I can find Stick Stock to give a comment on this.
Oh no,
because I know Dave does love Stick Stock, I believe. But yeah,
I live in quiet terror of the fact that somewhere in your house, Eric, you have set up a small shrine to that you kind of go live to camera on occasion.
There we are. Okay, so Stick Stock is on her book tour, promoting the rigorously peer-reviewed book that, as far as I know, is just chock full of false claims. But those were not rejected by peer review because they were false, but because they offended the sensibilities.
Well, they didn't offend the sensibilities at Little and Brown, clearly, which is who published it, is my
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
I mean, what will happen with a lot of these things, and almost certainly will happen with that book, is that people will read bits of it, be like, wow, this is bad, and then regret the money they spent on it, basically.
I mean,
They'll be.
that's how science progresses, right? Because I think, for instance, coming back to the Journal of Controversial Ideas, members of the editors and members of the editorial board have literally compared themselves to Copernicus and Galileo, like that they are the people who believe in a heliocentric, they're comparable to people who argue for heliocentric configuration of the universe, and they are the pioneers. They're doing science.
Yeah, and that is in and of itself. I mean, the hubris inherent in saying that kind of thing is impressive. But even again, taking them at their own word, that like somehow, being gender critical or saying that blackface is okay or saying that we're never going to get ultimate meaning is somehow comparable to the discovery of a heliocentric universe. I mean, like that's a level of you have to believe some things about yourself, right? Really strongly to come out with that. And I mean, Peter Singer is a case in point. Like this guy propounds a version of utilitarianism that is just, I mean, it's a couple steps away from like a kind of, he's right out there on the frontiers of euthanasia, and he's his definition of what constitutes the kind of greatest acceptable happiness and what we should or shouldn't do to kind of achieve that happiness is very, in and of itself controversial, right? But it's not broadly accepted.
Well, and it's also not censored.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading Peter Singer when I was an undergraduate in the 90s. And it was kind of like, here's one side of the argument, here's another side. And, I feel like he's made a career out of being the most extreme version of a particular argument, so that he always gets assigned next to the other extreme version of the argument. And, just kind of runs with thought experiments at different points. And similarly, I had to look up, Leon mentioned the editorial board. I had to look up Jeff McMahon, who I did also invite, because I should say Peter Singer did reply and said he wasn't able to make it, but that I should contact the other editors, which I did. And then they just did not reply to the invitation. But as far as I could tell, Jeff McMahon is a professor of philosophy at Oxford, and argues about just war theory and the ethics of killing. And, I could see how that might be controversial in certain contexts, but
importantly,
you've been published. You're a professorial chair.
I mean, but importantly,
Oxford.
So controversial and so no platform that they have had successful careers in academia in Oxford and Princeton universities for the last 40 years.
Yeah, well, and here's good old Nigel Bigar, who was listed as a historian the other day.
Yes, I can't say us historians are very happy about that, were we? No.
Yeah, but this is really it's an eminent editorial board. We've got sort of lots of folks that apparently I think this is part of the issue, is that one of the things that the launch of this journal does, which is really actually helpful, is they've been going on and on about there are all these controversial ideas out there that aren't being said. And then it turns out there just aren't that many. Like, actually, all of those ideas have already been said. And the ones that you're left with are, let's see, cognitive creationism is a term for ideologically based rejections of concepts from psychology. So if you disagree with behavioral genetic psychology, you are just the same as a creationist. Well, to be honest, that's not true. That's like, you can go to any number of journals and people will be arguing that position, but it's not well accepted that behavioral genetics are of that type. That's not the heliocentrism that we've been waiting for.
No.
And
One wonders if they should have named this.
Canceled.
Yeah. One wonders if they should have named this like the Journal of Controversial Forms of Reasoning, or like lack thereof in some ways. Like you read some of the things they're coming out with, and you're like, well, that just doesn't follow, right? Like that just doesn't make sense.
Well, this is the article I thought had the most appropriate title, which is "Defending the Defense of Stupid Ideas on University Campuses," which I feel like they really need. They're going to need to defend their stupid ideas on campus because this is one of them.
Can I just make an incredibly petty complaint, which might actually end up getting to the heart of the issue, which is like their website looks really terrible. The journal looks really, really terrible.
Yeah.
They really look like shit. And actually that's revealing. That's telling in it. Because I'm getting a little bit
Okay.
Because essentially the whole thing about platforming is when these people then try to build their own platform. Their platform looks really, really, really terrible. Building a platform that people want to get at is really hard. And so really the no platforming complaint coming from them is basically because they can't be bothered to build their own thing, and whenever they do try to build their own thing, it just looks like a real piece of shit because they're not actually willing to put in the hard work of doing that.
I mean, because isn't RSS, for example, being shut down? I mean, this does. Again, it's like I don't want to be too critical of aesthetics for its own sake, but this does look like, Blogspot. Is that what it used to be called? Google Sites. And they did start in 2013. I mean, there is HTML5 and all sorts of stuff that they.
This is a 2013 legacy.
So, shall we submit an article right now? No.
I really.
But why did this gets all covered in the news? Like, how many other journals got launched and actually have interesting stuff in them?
It's all part of like this might be like the respectable face of the so-called squared people and kind of the they used to call themselves the intellectual dark web. Like it's all part of the same kind of ecosystem, isn't it? And there's again like for a lot of people, myself included, I look at a lot of the things that these people say, and I'm like, that sounds pretty stupid, but all right, like, I'm going to mock you for saying that because I don't think it's very intelligent, but, like, you said it, cheers, right? But that, like, that is the exact opposite of what they demand, isn't it? They're like, no, you must take everything that I say incredibly seriously, and it's incredibly important that all the things that come out of my mouth be entertained as if the golden rule applies, and it's all very smart and intelligent, and that's just not how scholarship works. That's just not how speech works. We know that. And sort of it just only leaves one set of reasons, doesn't it, for why it's all happening, and that's to get attention. At the end of the day, it's about people paying attention to them. And there's really nothing beyond that. I mean, some of them find more dangerous crusades, I suppose, to go on. So like James Lindsay is off on one right now. I mean, like people like that are really scary, right? For a whole different set of reasons, not particularly related to their kind of crusade for some form of free speech. But someone like Singer is kind of, I don't have much time for his ideas, but it's just kind of anodyne, right? It's just like, okay, cool, right? Like you want to run a blogspot journal for your buds, that's okay, right? Like there's enough space in the digital world for that, and more power to you.
Yeah.
It's basically spite online with LaTeX and footnotes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some actual cancel culture that's happening that's underreported. I'm just trying to look up. Is it Fatima might go into cyber?
Ah,
Let's see.
yes, her next job might be in cyber, despite clearly being like a trained dancer
There
based
we go.
on the ad campaign.
Let's see. There we go. And I'll just pull this up on the screen. So, performing arts. Dave, what's going on with the performing arts these days?
Well, I mean, I think that I hope most people who will catch this, either now or later, will be aware. Recently, the Office for Students consulted on a really huge shift in their funding from certain subjects to other sort of high priority subjects. And the main headline was that they proposed to take about 50% of the funding away from the creative arts, so creative and performing arts, so music, drama, creative industry, and basically anything with a trajectory into the creative industries, and archaeology. These are, and there's a couple of other subjects in there, and they're going to redirect all of that funding towards so-called high priority subjects. So the government has designated them a big deal. So I think it was like nursing, a couple of other sort of STEM and STEM adjacent subjects in health and so on. And then they sort of put this out to consultation with a mere sort of a set of days, basically, for people to feed back. A huge swathe of the UK kind of arts and culture industry was like, what the heck is this? And petitions were started, people fed back. I spent a bit of time, for what it's worth, doing the same. I hope a bunch of people did. And the consultation closed last Friday, and I guess we'll see. I mean, they're gonna do it, right? Is kind of what's going to happen here. They're going to be like, oh, thanks very much for spending all that time and effort telling us why this is wrong, but we don't think it's wrong. Cheers.
Yeah.
And they're going to go ahead and do it. That's almost without a doubt. And it's all based, as far as I can tell, on just this notion that the government's in a position to pick winners when it comes to educational outcomes, that they know what's best in terms of what people ought to take at university and study at a university level. And I don't know that that's ever been proven to be possible or even kind of desirable to do, to be honest. So yeah, it's a bit of a disaster, really, for a whole range of courses that are basically designated as kind of quote unquote high costs. I mean, it costs money to teach someone archaeology, right? You got to hopefully do some field work. You got to go into the lab. You've got artifacts. You've got, expensive pieces of equipment. It frankly costs a lot more to teach someone archaeology than it does to teach them history, where you just need a heck of a lot of books and a decent amount of time to read them. I mean, you need more than that, but that's essentially, generalizing. So that's where we are. And that, I think, is one of the most, the government's been kind of going after the arts and the humanities for a while, but I think we're starting to see the real teeth behind that now. In terms of the funding, in terms of the actual resources being allocated, and it will hit poorer students hardest. This is my thing, right? If you're coming from a middle class or upper class background, the fact that this funding is cut, basically what it does is it disappears places at universities, kind of in the post-92 sector where I work. It doesn't affect archaeology at UCL, right? It doesn't affect archaeology at Oxford. Not nearly the same degree. And so, they won't even blink, right? They'll be like, yeah, we've got an endowment of several billion or whatever it is, so cheers. But where I work, that's existential for the archaeology program where I work, right? It's a big deal. And so I think this is where we are now. We're getting a kind of a new form of social engineering coming through, where they're basically trying to turn the arts and possibly even the humanities soon into a kind of enclave of the elite. So that's my rant. That's what's happening.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the really troubling thing is that it's kind of well, you mentioned how quickly it was kind of presented. It was just sort of thrown in with a consultation about a number of changes, the most significant of which, or the one that was due to get the most attention, was the getting rid of certain kinds of London weighting. But that's its own policy. But then kind of like underneath the line, they sort of threw in, oh, by the way, we're going to pay more for high cost science subjects, and then we're going to cut high cost non-science subjects. So they are picking winners and losers at this point, and they would like more science, and so they're paying for that. Now, the other thing it does reveal is that there's this mention of the Augur Review in this. This is a criticism by the Cultural Learning Alliance. The Augur Review really was trying to tackle the high cost of fees and trying to capture the actual cost of different courses, right? So what that reveals is that there is actually a huge amount of cross-subsidy that goes on in the humanities. I think a lot of people think of the humanities as a drain on resources, when in fact, in a lot of ways, the humanities are funding the whole university sector, and humanities students, as the units of resource, are funding the whole sector. And it's just much easier, or so people believe, to just throw on a humanities course, mass produce it, and then take the surplus and send it over to the sciences. So the sciences, which have been charging £9,000, actually cost £14,000 to put on. The extra £5,000 is coming from two sources. One is home humanities students, cross-subsidizing, and the other is overseas students, especially from China, just because it's much easier to go and market to one country than it is to market to the entire world, especially if that one country has 1 billion people. So, the university sector has not been properly funded for a long time, and it's just been smoke and mirrors to pretend like it has. And what they're starting to do now is, I think, was it a few weeks ago when we were talking about Gavin Williamson, Leon, you mentioned Ian Mansfield. I mean, this is him. I mean, when they talk about media studies is not an expensive course to put on. But that is the go-to Mickey Mouse degree in the Daily Mail, isn't it? Archaeology is expensive. Performing arts is expensive. You could just choose to have a Philistine nation or not. But media studies is not expensive. It's just not.
No, I mean, media studies, you need like old newspaper databases. You need a film and TV archive, a digital archive of some sort. Mm-hmm. And then you need access to the internet and YouTube. I mean, that's not expensive. I think what I find hilarious is that basically it's the kind of vision of society that this kind of consultation or this document also entails, right? So basically they want everyone to be working in science and tech or engineering, and then only the really posh people get to do music and drama and performing arts. So basically, like we're now in 2030, and all our TV series will star Lawrence Fox, and all of the albums will be made by James Blunt.
Oh, please!
Basically, the vision.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of James Fox, I mean, he just crashed and burned, didn't he?
Oh yeah, lost his deposit. Cancelled by the will of the people, to be perfectly honest. Cancelled by Count Binface.
But he and Richard Tice are now setting up a pub. It's going to be the Free Speech Pub. So I guess
is that a little 18th century guy with a burger in the bottom of that?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, isn't that just like?
Or is that the YouTube guy who's responding? Because it looks like it's Robespierre.
I'm sorry, you can't tell me that you can't go into pubs all around the country and say whatever racist business these guys want to say, and people will be fine with it.
I mean, even pub bores don't go to pubs to spend 100% of their time yelling about the woke, do they? Like, surely that's not, like, you want to go and get a bit drunk, right? Like, it's kind of boring to just sit there yelling about kind of university graduates or latte sipping Remainers for like an hour. Like, you must get bored after a while, surely.
There's this kind of bizarre kind of misconception that political discourse of any sort happens in pubs, but it's just mostly people talking about the Premier League for like 3 hours.
Yeah, like, do people even want... I mean, as far as I can tell, the huge, like, wokeness of everybody had zero effect on anyone's voting recently.
Yeah.
I mean...
the guy who... Sorry. The guy over the weekend, this Labour MP who like came out and got a splash of attention because he was like, oh, we're in too much in service to the woke or whatever he said, like the London crowd, and it's like, mate, like sub 2% of the voting public who fed back about their issues said that this was a thing. They don't care, right? Like, they just don't. There's a handful of animated Telegraph readers. I almost said Torygraph there habitually, right? who like care about this every Sunday, and then there's us who care about it because we're like being attacked every Sunday by the Telegraph. So we're allowed to care, right? Because they're literally, they're like denying professors of history research funding in the newspaper. So it's acceptable for us to care about that, and nobody else cares. Like, that's it. They care just long enough to be interviewed on television, and then they immediately stop caring about these sorts of things.
Yeah.
They care about whether the hospital's open, clearly. So yeah, it's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, but there is a kind of infrastructure of political scientists telling people that this stuff matters. But it strikes me, the more that I'm looking at it, the more it's actually, they're frustrated with their position inside the academy, and they're kind of like claiming to represent the people by saying all of these London elites just don't understand. This was one bit that I really enjoyed from last week. Let's see if I can pull this up. Or not last week, this is like a day or two ago, actually. Will Davies talking about this really humorous anecdote of this secret... You know how like all the politicians do their secret briefings, right? Like to Laura Kuenssberg, they're just like, it's always Dominic Cummings or that other guy were always the ones that were doing it, but they would pretend like an anonymous source in number 10. But so academics have decided to get in on this game. But what's really funny that Will Davies points out is, where this is not the right one, but he's talking about this particular comment by someone who's basically making this anonymous source. Oh, here it is.
Oh yeah.
An esteemed politics professor.
Yeah, an esteemed politics professor messaged me on Friday. Maybe this was the day the Labour Party died. Once Labour indulged in anti-Englishness, can anyone remember them doing that? In the party, and it begins with Tony Blair, so of course. Then they set in motion turning England over to the Tories, and when they do it at the same time as losing Scotland to the SNP, it's suicidal.
Hello,
just like,
I am an esteemed politics professor, and my name is Gat Mudwin, and
yeah,
what?
My name is Gat Mudman.
Yeah. And I am not from Kent Doll. Like, come on.
We'll sort of Photoshop in like a little black box over his eyes here and just be like, oh, as soon as they went into anti-Englishness, that's what the problem was. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Like, no one thinks that. But
I mean,
okay.
Taking it seriously for a moment, I feel like they want, like, someone like Matt Goodwin is trying to get his hands dirty in the manufacturing of consent, isn't he? He's like, he's tired of studying it. He wants to do it, So he's going to spend as much time as humanly possible in the broadsheets and in public, basically doing his best to manufacture a kind of consensus wisdom that the left is kind of failing because it is doing this thing, right? Of kind of kowtowing to, to the woke left or whatever his thing is, right? And I mean, we see it, but I mean, the real question is, will it work, right? Like, will it be successful? Will there be a new consensus manufactured that is actually a political problem? I think that's actually the serious question.
I mean, what if all of this is basically just for an impact case study?
Well,
You know, it'd probably get rated pretty highly, like just like participant research.
Well, this is my impact case study coming right up. You ready? There.
Oh,
We're gonna submit this to the ref.
oh. Oh, I can see that. I can see the
Stick
environment
stock.
statement already.
Stick stock.
Backlit by 2 candles. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if one person, if Kathleen Stock's book can get impact case study, which I'm sure, University of Sussex is preparing the case now. But just, I mean, because it was just election recently, and one thing I should say is, I'm very sorry to Count Binface, by the way. Count Binface did in fact send a message that I didn't get the chance to read out loud.
Oh no.
Maybe I can read it now. So Count Binface, let me pull up his image on the screen.
Well, we don't know. It's Count Binface. We're not sure, right?
No,
Yeah. I mean, that's the mystery of the bin.
here we are. There we go.
Count Binface transcends such things, I think.
Here we are. So Count Binface, and I'll try and I don't know what his voice sounds like, but what we asked was what he thought about the free speech issue as a basis for running for London mayor. Is there a crisis of free speech, and how does your coverage in the national press rate with Lawrence Fox's, seeing as you're polling at similar rates at the time? So Count Binface wrote, free speech, well, that's a right old hornet's nest, so I can see why you're resorting to asking a space alien what he thinks. I reckon democracy is the greatest political invention in the galaxy, and it needs to be cherished and respected as the opportunity for any citizen to stand for election, no matter how crazy, or in my case sensible, they appear. Of course they need to abide by the law, but that goes without saying. The trickier thing is, how do you balance free speech with the wild, wild west of the internet? That's right, I'm comparing the World Wide West to that horrific film starring Will Smith, Kevin Kline, and Kenneth Branagh. Now that is a terrible film. Sorry, that was me interjecting.
Editorializing Binface.
Yeah, sorry.
How dare you?
I mean, good song, covering the sampling Stevie Wonder, but not a good film. It's that bad. This is why I'm all about reinstating the golden wonder that is CFAX, to provide a news service that is free, beautiful to look at, and completely free from trolling. If you don't know what CFAX is, look it up. It rocks. As for Mr. Fox, a lot of people are choosing to compare his campaign with mine, and they're welcome to do so. But as many a football manager has said, I'm looking up the table, not down. Ooh, burn. So what is this CFAX? Leon was nodding his head. What is this?
CFAX, greatest invention of the 20th century. CFAX has been no platform. We should bring back CFAX.
What is? It's a teletext.
Oh my God! Do we have to explain CFAX to you? It's like right now you watch TV, you can press the red button for whatever sort of, I don't know, football score updates, the headlines, and blah 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 blah. And this was, before the age of internet, and before the red button, and you can press the telefax button.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're going to go for a retro aesthetic, go for this and not, Blogspot. I feel like that's a better look than this.
We've lost something in our journey through technology, haven't we? Yeah.
There is a charm in this. But one thing I was thinking about with the journal for controversial ideas was that what was it? They did say, so when Count Binface mentioned the legal issues, one thing I was struck by was in their editorial policies, right? The Journal of Controversial Ideas said that they will not publish instructions for creating biological weapons.
I love this. Yeah. This is great.
So, in other words, they would not accept farts, or
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like that seems to be their red line. Is instructions for pipe bombs, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, models for 3D printing personal weapons or whatever. But it's so like it's such an interesting it's such an interesting definition of harm, isn't it? We're going to publish a whole bunch of ideas which could be potentially understood as extremely harmful and misleading and potentially very dangerous. But we draw the line at no recipes for 3D printing, a pistol or cooking up using CRISPR, a new virus. We're not gonna do that. And okay, right? But it's an interesting line to draw. Like too controversial, it seems like a sort of an interesting conceit to me that's kind of where you're going to go.
I mean, it is interesting coming from a journal where one of the editors is basically a proponent of euthanasia. So you would think that creating weapons of mass destruction that will facilitate euthanasia would be right up his street, but there we go.
Oh, but you got to do it in an ethical way. That's the whole point, isn't it? You have to find some systemically ethical way, as if brighter minds hadn't already tried in the 18th century, right? To kind of come up with a rationale for why this person dies young and this person lives until they're 96, and why is it always wealth, right?
The real reason that we haven't gotten to that answer is because of peer review.
100%. I mean, Jeremy Bentham would have figured it out if it weren't for those darn peer reviewers in the early 19th century, which stopped him from...
No, it's like Twitter. It's Twitter because they're not saying we want to kill these people because they're less human than we are. Because of Twitter and the fear of the woke mob, the chilling effects. Otherwise, we would say it. I mean, that's essentially the premise.
Yeah.
So, we have covered a lot of ground actually this week. Anything we want to say about the election, or is that just a minefield waiting to happen? I mean,
it's we're all caught in it to a certain extent. I mean, it was local elections, right? So we're not going to be facing full-on culture war until maybe 2023, 24. But it's all part of the same game plan. So that when the time comes and the first truly post-Brexit, kind of post-pandemic general election happens, we'll, sort of education, academia, whatever you want to call it, it's all going to be in the firing line in this country. Because it makes for a very useful scapegoat at the end of the day, right? It allows you to kind of create an us versus them, enemy within culture very easily. It doesn't take a lot of work to get it done. And I have to say, there's people out there who work in academia, and actually this is sort of the original premise of this show, right? Who work in academia who are kind of aiding and abetting this. They're like, sweet, well, I know which side of this I want to be on, right? And it's not the side getting persecuted. So I'm going to pick my, I'm going to become a pet teacher as quickly as humanly possible, and I'm going to pick my side so that I'm not in trouble when the time comes. And it's kind of sad. It's super dangerous. But it's kind of sad. I mean, I'm very glad it isn't an issue in local elections. I would be terrified, truly terrified, if we'd reached a situation in this country where in local elections you could win office by slagging off your local history prof. That would be that's bad, right? If we ever see that happen, that's a warning sign. That's a flashing red light.
Yeah, silver linings. People are still interested in potholes and bin collection.
Right. And Count Bin Face, apparently. Count Bin Face.
Hey.
So I mean that is definitely looking on the bright side of things, which is surprising in Toryland. I think what I suppose I was thinking was the local elections seem to play themselves out according to local issues, but the Labour Party in particular seems to be running around without a head. And as we discussed last week with Phoenix, they just don't seem to have any grasp on this type of issue, this culture war issue, and they're trying to just sort of stay above the fray.
But Eric, have you not heard that they're under new management? Like, that's the thing. They're under new management, dude. That's all that matters.
That just makes me think of like Mitt Romney and kind of like coming in and being like, you're under new management. Congratulations, you're fired. Like, you know, you're under new management. We're gonna restructure the company. There's not going to be many of you left because we're shipping your jobs to Wisconsin.
The thing about under new management is if you bother to watch like 2 episodes of like Gordon Ramsay, like where he goes around and tries to fix restaurants with like problems with the food and whatnot, like the thing is always like, oh, if we put this restaurant under new management, then people will come back. And they probably do come back for about 2 weeks, and then the restaurant closes down anyway. That is the same story with every single Gordon Ramsay episode, if you bother to follow up what's going on.
The minute the cameras leave, right? Like, okay, guys, close it up, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just curious because it feels like the center made a lot of effort to kind of put themselves back into place in the Labour Party with the idea that this was going to be more electable. And I feel like there is this large swathe of centrist politicians and certainly the commentariat who does believe that it's because of all of this woke identity politics that they were losing. But now it's just kind of like, actually, it turns out no one cares about that stuff at all. And that, you know, maybe it's...
Well, I mean,
maybe it's a demonstration that the problem is
their most loyal voting bloc cares, right? So if we want to be like, so the people who care are like young people and young educated people in particular, and they care about all these things. But I wouldn't. I hate that word.
Well, but I think it's because they present it as though it's like these are just niche issues, and it's like, well, racial justice is not a niche issue.
No.
It's just like the right or the wrong thing to do. And surely it should be acceptable to have politics that says this is like a red line. Trans rights are a red line. Economic justice is like a red line. And to do that is not being like some extremist, like leftist. It's just being like, that's the politics that I subscribe to. And
I mean,
if you want my vote,
true.
You need to like demonstrate that.
Yeah.
Or
this is the true moral vacuum at the heart of labor at the moment, I would argue, I suspect, is that they just, they might personally, as members of parliament or as leaders, believe, not just believe, but understand what you just said, right? Which is that, racial equality is not like a niche issue, right? But they just don't seem to have the ability or the conviction to kind of go out in public and campaign on it and do politics on it. They're so scared of all of it that they just kind of get run out of the entire arena. And we see this on trans rights, unfortunately, within the party, where they just will not take a stand. They're like, well, it's debatable. It's like, it's really not, guys. It's an issue of basic dignity and equality, and you kind of have to start there. And if you don't start there,
decades ago. I mean, that's the weird thing. It's like, oh, you gotta, hear people out, and it's like, no. This is actually a really old issue, and there's really no reason why we should have to listen to pro and against slavery. You really got to hear both sides on this one, and it's like,
unfortunately, every Sunday, Eric, we're going to be hearing pro and against slavery for the rest of time.
What's interesting here, by the way, it's the renaissance of Andy Burnham, right? Because if we think back to Andy Burnham in 2015, when he was running for Labour Party leader, I mean, he was by any measure quite a beige politician. But now, as Manchester mayor, now he's gone one step removed from the Parliamentary Labour Party, which by all means is probably quite a toxic environment, and he's just basically sort of says what he thinks, and ironically that makes him more electable.
well, he's also in a position where he can do some things, right? I mean, this is the other, like he's mayor of a huge region. He has a big budget. He can, he has real concrete priorities that he can sort of say, measure me by this, and then when he accomplishes it, people do measure him by it, and I think that's appropriate. And I think that's, I mean, I think that was the story of the elections. I think most people have got there. They're like, okay, where major labor politicians had kind of urban metropolitan power and used it to improve people's lives, they got reelected. Like, cheers. That's a poli-sci seminar right there. And I just think it'll be really kind of sad to watch if the party doesn't. I mean, I'm no longer a Labour Party member, right? But like, if I was,
none of us Labour Party members were talking about it all the fucking time.
Yeah, all bitter ex-wives of the Labour Party up in here being like, But seriously, like, if you don't learn that lesson, where are you going? Like, what desert are you headed into? If that's
I don't really understand again, going back to the aesthetics. I don't know why that's been the major critique of the day. But look, Andy Burnham has clearly realized I should look like this. This is New Order. Today, he can be the old New Order. This is the drummer, right? Over here. And it's just like, why, who in the consulting room thinks what we really need is like Keir Starmer dressed up like a consultant, pretending to drink pints everywhere. And that's going to appeal to all these people who voted for Brexit. It's like...
And they're smarter than that. They're a lot smarter than that, right? They're going to see through that. It's not going to work.
No, and like the thing with Andy Burnham is everybody loves his his jacket or whatever he wore on that day.
I think they just like his facial expression when he reacts to things on phones. I mean, that's legendary, right? He's authentic. He's authentic, right? He's politically authentic, and that's like that will resonate even if people don't agree with it.
And this is by no means like the coolest thing in the world. I mean, New Order is pretty awesome, but I mean, it's like this. They look like 50-year-old, 60-year-old Manchester folks, Mancunians. And that's cool. That's who they are. But I think that this... And I actually do think that Keir Starmer's also being authentic. He's just being an authentic cipher for post-industrial professionalism, like with zero ideological content. And therefore nothing inspiring. So
basically he's truly... nothing is what you're saying. Like, he's true to it.
Yeah, he's like he's distilled like the passion of neoliberalism, like the passion for passionlessness and just pure, like, what was that one change thing he said? I will change the change. It was no different than that video Leon likes to link to. We'll post it in the links after the show. The change. We're going to change the way that we change, and that's the change that I will change.
Right.
Kind of like, okay, yeah, content any day here, guys, any day.
I don't know. I mean, I think for us and for free speech in general, the issue here is that it's a baseball game with only one team at the moment, right? Like, there's no, in terms of organized politics, who exactly are we looking to kind of have an articulated, kind of cogent perspective on this that isn't the Tories? We know what their perspective is, right? And they're very successfully kind of peddling it and keeping the newspapers occupied with it, and that's very helpful for them politically. Who's going to come up and step into the other batter's box? Like, who's going to step into the batter's box and play against them on this? Nobody seems willing to do it, and I think that's an issue. You have a bunch of people out there who just basically aren't getting defended. They have no one to represent them culturally or socially on these issues, and that's a huge problem.
Well, we'll get it done. Maybe not us personally. We'll try. I don't know, but I think it's got to change at some point, and the sooner the Labour Party can get their act in gear, I think not just get rid of Keir. I mean, you could keep Keir; he's just going to do whatever he's told to do, but you do need to get rid of those. I always picture that guy Ollie from The Thick of It, making all these really cheesy suggestions, like, "Oh, here's your pint. Here's roll up your sleeves. in this instance and don't do it in this instance. It's just like that's what social media has done. I mean, there's just no room to be different people at different times. It's like you have to be yourself, and that's actually something Boris Johnson is good at doing. At the end of the day,
yeah. Alexander De Pfeffel, what an incredible act that is. One of my side things is I work on vagrancy and homelessness, and a couple of years ago I took a look at Boris Johnson and realized that he looks and acts an awful lot like an upright man, basically like a leader of the underworld. Basically, it's a particular type of role in invented kind of rogue fiction in the early modern period. He acts exactly like it. It's uncanny, and it's really effective politics now, and that should be very troubling, I think, to most people, because there's no duty to honesty in that kind of politics, right? You say what you need to say when you need to say it. You say it convincingly, and you move on. And you win, right? In that you're always on the run, you're always on the make. There we are, some Thomas Harmon, and you're always kind of successfully kind of getting yours, right? Acquiring, doing up your flat, getting the funds for your nanny, getting the kind of bungs to your mates. You're always on the move, and everybody's always playing catch up with you. And as long as that's the way the politics works, the dude's going to win, right? Like, because it's not like he's unskilled at it. He clearly knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Well,
hopefully we know what we're doing. At least we're getting there. We're getting better at what we're doing. I'm sure we have to go. I know some of us have teaching to do and whatnot. But we were too controversial today for Journal of Controversial Ideas. But I feel like next fortnight we will bring on someone with proper controversy. Really just to get the water boiling again. Get the kettle.
Have we decided who's that going to be, by the way?
Well, I don't know. I have to run it by Phoenix and Joe and Carl and so on. But I wonder if we should go for Selena Todd. What do we think? Yeah?
Yeah, don't invite me to that one.
No, I think I'm gonna have to feel that one myself at a certain point. But yeah, no, I mean, I think if the goal is a platform, we give her a platform and see what she has to say. And just remember, comments are live, so we'll see what her followers also have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's the right thing to do at the end of the day, to kind of try and have those conversations as best you can.
And our platform does look better than the Journal of Controversial Ideas.
It does.
This is an important point. Yeah.
And with that, I will leave us with our fantastic outro and see everyone next time. Thank you so much, Dave Hitchcock, for joining us. And some guy, I will see you again soon. Bye.
What kind of a world is it? Y'all know what? You can't say what he thinks, is that why?
Huh?
Free speech